So I guess we could get into it. Did you want to, Tim, since you're a big fan, did you want to tell the plot of Trigun, and let us know what it's all about?
Well, the plot of Trigun kind of depends on which version you're going with, but the general gist of it is it's this desert world. In the 98 version kind of led you on to believe that maybe it was Earth in the future, maybe it wasn't. But you get very much a desert Western vibe to the whole thing. And it follows Vash the Stampede, the humanoid typhoon, who more or less attracts calamity wherever he goes. And there's these two people sent from the insurance society to keep track of him since tragedy and catastrophe and property damage, namely, follows him wherever he goes. And he faces off against a variety of increasingly ridiculous bounty hunters. Some of them are on screen right now. In the first episode, he faces off against some pretty ridiculous characters. And the initial plot of the 98 series, I think, can be summed up with who is Vash the Stampede, because nobody can seem to agree on who he even is, which I think was my favorite addition over the manga, just on the whole. And it starts off kind of just as a simple desert Western, but it quickly evolves into quite a bit more sci-fi.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that this series shares a lot of similarities to something like Cowboy Bebop. They actually premiered even the same year. They both came out in 1998. The animated series, both sci-fi elements, both heavily westernized, because it's both kind of including a very cowboy man with no name type of element to it. You mentioned Vash the Stampede. He's the guy that's the badass and has this dark past. It seemed like that was kind of a big thing. I kind of remarked that on Twitter about like him and Spike Spiegel, Kenshin. That was that like a big thing, you think, back in the day? Like, the whole hero with the dark past, you know what I mean, who was a badass but had this goofy kind of demeanor. Was that kind of like the big trope back in anime, back, you'd say, in the 90s, early 2000s?
Definitely.
I'd say it maintains to this day. A lot of shonen have a goofy protagonist or a really oafish, kind of some sort of demeaning quality, but ultimately dark past.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing with Vash, the Stampede is, and the thing is, like, John Wick. When you say John Wick, I don't say he's really goofy though. He's just
not goofy, but the mysterious dark past, I guess.
Yeah, mysterious dark past. He's got that. Yeah. So that was kind of the thing, I would say, back then with a lot of anime. So it's very much a heavily kind of westernized show of having this kind of those elements in there. Very cowboy elements. So that was kind of very nice. And with the 98 series, so we're going to be comparing both the 98 series and the 2023 series there, just to go back and forth. So we're going to go back and forth between the both of them. But let's start off with the 98 series here. So did you all watch it like the same way I did on Toonami, and what were kind of your first impressions of it?
Well, I know I saw Stampede first and then followed suit with the 98 series. So I was relatively new. Trigun is kind of a 2023 thing for me.
Really? So you saw the 2023 version and then you went back and saw the 98 version. Interesting.
Yes.
Oh, okay. What about you, Sage?
I did watch it on Toonami. I was a kid. I remember I didn't have cable, so I'd go to my cousin's house to watch anime because that's like the only place I could get access to it. And yeah, I remember watching a decent amount of it. Looking back, because I had to rewatch it all recently for this, but looking back, I feel like I only must have seen a couple of episodes or like a few scattered ones, and they were only probably stuff in the first half. So I think my memory of it was that I had seen a lot more than I actually had. But I remember enjoying it as a kid quite a bit. And then maybe 10 years ago, I remember seeing it on Netflix and I was like, oh, let me give this a try. Let me turn it on. And I remember not making it super far in then, just because I almost found it to be a little too goofy. And then I just went back and I gave it another chance, and I did watch the entire thing, and I think I definitely undersold it the last time I gave it a shot, because I don't think the goofiness is it. I don't think it hurts it as much as I used to, but I also think that once you get past the first half, I think I'm going to be honest. I think the writing falls off a cliff once you get past like the first 12 episodes or so.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be interesting to dig into that more with you. So yeah, I saw the original series, like I said, on Toonami. This was an anime I don't have too strong memories of, so it was interesting going back and watching it because I don't think I ever finished the whole thing. But I do remember that intro. That intro I do remember very,
Oh
very
yeah, that's good.
distinctly. Because the intro does make you like want to feel like you want to play air guitar. So it's a very, very strong kind of 90s kind of metal type intro there. So I remember that very, very distinct. And then the whole look of Vash himself, that 90s kind of anime style, very distinct as well. Like the red trench coat that he's kind of wearing. He has his weapon of choice, which is like this revolver that he has, white revolver, which they changed it in the Trigun Stampede, where in the original series it's white, but then he has black in the original series and the updated series here. And I know that one of the big elements here is that he has a twin brother named Knives, who is the complete opposite of him in every way, who is one of the main antagonists of this show, and he has a black revolver there, so it's kind of white black kind of contrast there each other. And then the voice actor, the English voice actor I was mentioning the Sage before this, Johnny Young Bosch, who people 90s kids will know, he was the second Black Power Ranger there, so people might know that. And he was even, I think he was in the Power Rangers movie that came out back in the 90s. So, and he actually makes an appearance again. He's reprising his role as Vash the Stampede in this updated version there, which is nice. So looking at that, some of it is, the beginning of it is a lot of enemy of the week type stuff, like Tim said, getting to know Vash, getting to know, trying to figure out who is this mysterious figure, getting to know his past. I think keeps you very intrigued throughout a lot of the series. Do you think when you get kind of a lot of the reveals of it, do you think it is, it is pretty satisfying for you to learn about more about Vash, or do you think it's kind of disappointing in any way?
Personally, I think just in terms of the way it's structured in the original, I think the when the big reveals happen a little halfway through, I don't love how they're handled, especially when you get to the big flashback episode. I think it's episode 17. And if you've watched both versions and can compare to each other and then the book especially, there's a lot of crucial pieces of information in that backstory that the 98 version just kind of omits altogether. It just does not mention certain elements that I felt like were really important pieces, like what Vash and I actually are doesn't seem to actually be clarified at any point in the 98 series. So I honestly do find it the reveal's a little disappointing in the original anime.
Yeah. Tim, what about you?
So before I had read the manga, I was really I really did kind of like some of the character reveals. I enjoyed how they kind of toyed with your expectations, because a lot of people at the time hadn't read the manga. It was in Shonen Jump, but outside that, it didn't have a really big following. So going 10 episodes or so before you figure out what Bash actually is, and what, by translation, what Nai actually is, I kind of liked that. But then with the kind of hindsight of like the other iterations, they got it out of the way a bit earlier. And I kind of liked that a bit more, just because it gave more time to kind of go into the details of what it is. And I think ultimately the details kind of amplify the sci-fi genre on the whole. Like, a lot of it is like what makes it work in this universe.
To move away a little bit from Vash, what do you all think about some of the supporting characters here? Most important, like Millie and Meryl here. And they kind of do a little bit of update of them in the 2023 version, where in the 98 version, they're like insurance agents, but in this newer version, they're like journalists here in the newer version. What do you think about some of the side characters in the 98 version there? Do you think it's a pretty strong supporting cast?
The 98 version, I think it did have a really good, Millie and Meryl were really a force to be reckoned with. And I think the show was at its best in some of the scenes where they involved. Uh, I also really liked, I kind of preferred the Insurance Society just a bit more, because it made sense, like that was the reason that they were being followed around, is because like he breaks stuff wherever he goes. It makes sense to have an eyewitness.
Yeah. What about you, Sid?
Yeah, I think the supporting cast is great. Millie, for anyone that is concerned, Millie has not been cut from Stampede. She will be here in a following season. But she's like the original Brienne of Tarth. I think the original like likable giant woman character. But yeah, I think she's great. I think Meryl's great. Wolfwood, personally, is probably my favorite of the supporting characters. But some of that's just visual design.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Roberto is an original character as well, like not from the manga at all. Like he's like a completely new addition to the Stampede version.
Roberto. He was the character with the beard, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's the
other
older
reporter.
reporter.
Older reporter, yeah. Okay, yeah. And you mentioned Meryl and Millie there. Also you have like in animes, you also have characters. I don't know what obsession is with anime creators and hugely impractical weapons. The one guy who is comes from the who has the crosses, and he has like the big cross that he carries around that contains a bunch of guns. Also, even was it in the 98 version? It was Meryl, right, that had the big Gatling gun, right?
Yeah, it was a big
Millie.
Gatling stun gun. Millie had the giant kind of, it would shoot giant, like, I don't know, like metal crosses or something that would like
And then
knock people out.
Meryl had like the Derringers in her cape. She'd like throw her cape open, and there'd be like 100 Derringers like hooked to the inside of it.
Yeah. It's like, man, I like I gotta imagine the upper body strength of a lot of anime characters is probably ridiculous. I mean, it is very, very strong. I mean, just all that equipment all the time, to stay strapped. I'm
That
going to
trope
transition a
actually
little bit
comes
to.
from Berserk.
Oh, really? You think? Okay.
That's where like that really started.
Oh, nice. Yeah, because he had such the massive sword there. Gut did, with the massive.
Yep.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense
And
there.
then later on in the series, that cannon arm.
Also the canon, true.
Which Bash incidentally has in the manga.
That's inspired by Berserk, I think, too. Bash's fake arm.
Yeah, I remember talking to you, Sage, about it. About a lot of beginning animes, a lot of like what was kind of a lot of kicked everything off. Like Berserk was huge, I think, influential. And then when I sent you that video, you talk about Astro Boy was also hugely influential.
Yeah,
and very
Speed
big.
Racer too.
Speed Racer, Lupin, both animes from the 50s to 60s, that really kicked a lot of things off that were hugely inspirational. There's
also the Devil Man.
Devil Man, yeah, that was also a big one too. Devil Man. As far as speaking about influence, this Trigun series, do you think like throughout the years, the character of Ash, this series, has it had somewhat of similar relevance or importance, do you think, in anime as something maybe like a Cowboy Bebop or something like a maybe Full Metal Alchemist? As far as kind of, well, I shouldn't even include Full Metal Alchemist because that was more like earlier 2000s, but more from like the 90s anime, like the pillars of 90s anime up until now. Do you think that Trigun was that?
I think it definitely carries a big influence. I don't know if I'd say it's as big as some of those other examples, but I think you can definitely feel a continuation and evolving of some of the same influences that it also took. So you talk about stuff like the giant weapons and the dark mysterious past. It definitely plays on a lot of those same tropes and as other things at the time. I feel like it's been a little more forgotten about over the years, which is part of why I'm really glad that they did this new one. I think it actually needs that shot in the arm to kind of reestablish its relevance in pop culture again.
I can say it launched the careers of several of the voice actors for the series, and so I know Wolfwood, before his English voice actor passed away, did quite a bit of voice work for various different companies. So a lot of smaller supporting roles, but then we have Danny Young, who that launched his career in voice acting into the kind of heights that it was. And that is why he was so kind of willing to come back to Stampede, just because everyone from the English voice cast was willing to come back and reprise their roles for Stampede. So I think is the biggest legacy. It just wasn't as big a household name as Berserk, if you were big into the manga or the animated trilogy, or even Devilman.
Well, an important, I think, part of the legacy that it did have too was the manga was canceled after those initial 25 chapters, and it was only due to the popularity 20, and it was only due to the popularity of the anime, in particular, how popular it was in the West, that the book got a chance to continue a few years, actually tell its whole story. So no matter whether you feel like which one is better or whatever, every iteration does have some importance to how the other ones got made. So they're all kind of tied together in some ways.
Okay. And Tim, have you ever seen the Trigun movie?
Badlands Rumble, yes. I watched that most recently, I think, of all of them. And I have to say, I did like the increased animation or effort in animation for that movie, and that it maintained the 98 style pretty well. Personally, I don't think it added a tremendous amount to the overall lore that we knew about the world. It was mainly just a cool adventure with Vash solving a mystery.
He was also at his most obnoxiously handsiest, I think, in that movie too.
Yeah, which I wasn't expecting. Wasn't that 2011? So that was 13 years after the anime closed up. So it's closer to Stampede than it is the 98 version. But ultimately, I'm glad they kept with it, because without that one, we would not have had the work put into Stampede that we did.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess we can get into a little bit of Stampede here. The 2023 version. So, watching it, completely different animation style. That you have the CGI 3D animation. Watching it, when I first heard this was announced, looking at the animation, I was like, damn, they kind of turned Vash into a twink. I mean, what kind of happened here? Kind of a little bit here, it's such a kind of different animation style. But so something a little bit I was different used to. But actually watching the series, I was like, kind of warmed up to it a little bit more. Even though it's vastly different. Did they ever announce what was the creative decision behind this, about the way it looks, or why they decided to go CGI 3D animation?
I believe it's a studio that exclusively does 3D CG animation. I could be wrong on that. I think Studio Orange specializes in that. And just because they wanted to do it, it was that was the in-house animation, that technology that they just inevitably kind of had to use.
Okay. Tim, do you have any insight on it, or?
I know the creator of the series was really just excited that anybody was still interested in his work. And so he was willing to hear offers from anybody that was willing to put forth any. And this was the studio that kind of came up and said, hey, yeah, we'd love to adapt this. And they provided him with a script. He signed off on it and said ultimately he didn't have to change a whole lot to the script, just because they'd already given him such a solid adaptation proposal.
Nice. Oh, very good. So say I want to get your opinion. You're kind of like me, going from the 98 to the 2023 version. What are some noticeable differences besides the animation that you see here from watching the 98 version to the 2023 version?
Yeah. Well, so you right off the bat, you have some differences in the character designs, right? They're also, some of them are at a bit of a different place in life. Meryl is a good example. She's the younger one. She's the rookie. In the original, you see Millie constantly refer to Meryl as senior. And I've read some interviews with the studio head for this animation, and they were talking about how, one of the ideas going into this was that they wanted to do it, it's a new adaptation, it's a reboot, it's a reimagining, and it's also a little bit of a prequel at the same time. It's kind of pulling the characters back to a slightly earlier stage in their life and trying to allow them to develop into the characters that we see at the start of the 98 series. So I think that'll be something that's really interesting when the second season ends up coming out, is how much do the character designs change to match the original in terms of the costuming and everything, because it is meant to build up to the point that they become those characters. Otherwise, you have characters like Roberto, who that's completely new. The gang, the Nebraska family that comes after the town in Bash in like the first episode or second episode. Those characters they appear in like the back half of the original series. So you've really got like this interesting restructuring where it's not just retelling things, but it's moved things around in kind of a totally different order.
Okay. Tim.
I have to agree with a lot of what Sage said. Everything of what Sage said, because it ultimately is it's a kind of telling. It's not quite the manga. It's not quite the 98 series. It takes some of what the 98 series did really good in terms of it's especially visible in the first episode, some of that levity and goofiness, and kind of higher paced octane kind of action sequences. But then you also kind of detract where I like to tell people, if you like levity in your anime a bit more, 98 series is where you're going to want to go. But if you're looking for something a bit more introspective and about character building, kind of takes itself a bit more seriously, you're going to go with Stampede, because they restructure the existing story, kind of put some plot lines earlier. It starts, I believe, I want to say a few months before, or no, 3 years before the events of where 98 starts off. So
because he doesn't have that 60 billion bounty yet.
Yeah, it starts off 60 million double dollars, and then it builds itself up to that over time. And a lot of people were really mad about that when the series first launched for some reason. And it was like a single letter change, but they were really mad about it. But don't worry, his hair will go back to that same 98 version. It's like that's what we kind of are hinted at the very end of the series, the part 1 of Stampede. And we're going to be getting a lot of, we're getting Millie, we're getting a lot of what people liked about the 98 version. Kind of both.
Okay. So it's kind of it's going to be a build up to what we see in the kind of 98 version, everything like that. Sometimes we'll see that in reboots, reimaginings, where we'll see the characters become the characters that we know when we kind of first introduced to them beforehand. So yeah, I would say it has that goofiness in there. Of course, there's always, as Sage mentioned, a lot of things like with the Vash, the Stampede character, and just the thing in anime in general. Speaking about a lot of tropes, there always have to have a character who's aggressively horny, right? Always got to have that character who's always there, and that is the titular character there. And the creator of Trigun said that that's a little bit of a difference there between this and the manga. Like Vash is more interested in women than he is in the manga there. So yeah, so I kind of see that. Some of the action sequences, how would you all compare it both? I would say in this newer versions, it's got a little bit of more fluidity to it. I think some of the look of it looks a little bit more exciting, I would say. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I mean, I think the 98 series has a great sense of style. The animation is nice looking. But I think when they got to big climactic action sequences in that version, a lot of times I felt like the animation, it showed its low budget a little bit there. It felt limited. Whereas even though not everybody might be into the CG, I think it does allow for a much easier time to animate high scale kind of epic action sequences. I mean, I don't know if you've managed to finish all of Stampede yet, Josh, but and I don't want to say too much spoilers for people who may not have watched it yet, but there is some action scenes that's up there with like, $100 million comic book movies. I think better than most of the ones we've seen recently. Even.
Okay. Tim.
I really enjoyed the action sequences in Stampede a bit more. Like, that's not to denigrate on the 98 version at all, because they did have some really well thought out animation. Like, if you take some of the scenes from the manga, they weren't given much to go with. It's kind of like animating Attack on Titan is. It's like, how am I supposed to animate this based off of what was drawn? And I think they did a really good job in the 98 version. But with the technology that they're using and the animation style that they're using for the Stampede, I think that's where it excels, is in those areas where that kind of more fluid motion and the more intense colors and kind of like effects, like the explosions, I think have a bit more gravitas to them versus the 98 version, where the explosions kind of almost blend into the background tonally. Everything has a bit more of a washed out color, whereas Stampede is a bit more vibrant.
If you were going to compare the action scenes in the finale compared to the finale, in the original, you get like 70% of the episode being like a clip show of previously viewed animation. And then in the Stampede, you get this completely fresh, not one bit of reused animation, totally clean looking sequence.
And Stampede's part one, also nowhere in the manga, but I think it does actually improve upon what we did getting in the manga. It's the best iteration, just because it's wild to look at. It's one reason why I would go out of my way to recommend Stampede, or at the very least TRIGUN, to people.
There's one really cool detail. I don't want to be too specific because I don't want to spoil it, but there's something that Vash does in the last episode that, if you pause and really look at the animation, it's made of the Kirby dots, which is that kind of really psychedelic looking, black sphere with the white outline animation that Jack Kirby invented doing the original Marvel Comics run. They actually used that Kirby dot as like an animation effect in the finale, which I thought just looked spectacular.
Oh, very nice. That's a nice little Easter egg there. Very, very nice. There are, even in the 90s era, there's some Easter eggs there, like, it connections back to the fact that it is so westernized that they make a lot of references to like movies, you know what I mean, from the West, or TV shows from the West, or anything like that.
I can't say I caught too many of those personally, although there is, I don't remember its name, but there's like a black cat that appears in every episode of the 98 series. That's like often it's jumping in front of the camera, like pointing itself out. But I don't know entirely what the significance of that, but it's clearly something they cared about repeating.
Okay. Tim, do you know anything about that? Any Easter eggs you caught, or anything connections to Western media?
Other than the fact that they used a lot of slang and tropes from like the old spaghetti Western style, like the vivid, like a lot of the shot framing. If you go back and look at some of the old classic Westerns, and I can't name any specifically, but they all do share that general motif of sunset low on the horizon, intense desert, like showing how small somebody is in perspective to the vast open desert. They do draw a lot of shot inspiration for the camera work that they do, or the shot framing that they do. It's you also hear a lot of the instrumentation, at least in the 98 version. You hear like a lot of harmonica. You hear jugs, like blowing on a jug in the soundtrack. And I just can't get over that, because that shows that they were actually kind of looking at these old Westerns and kind of being like, all right, what do we want to draw from these? And I think 98 did go for that Western vibe a bit more, but Stampede, I think, also kind of pulled it off with some of those zoom out shots of the overall desert scape.
There is one, I'm not 100% confident it was intentional, but I do think Wolfwood's giant cross might have been inspired or loosely inspired by the original Django movie from like the 50s, where the character's dragging a coffin around the whole movie, and then he opens it up and there's a gun in it. And that was kind of like a thing where he dragged this big heavy thing with the gun inside it around, kind of pretending it wasn't what it was. And then, when trouble breaks out, he pulls it out and there's a big dramatic reveal. I don't know for sure that was supposed to be reminiscent of that, but at least it did remind me of it.
Okay. Speaking about a lot of the similarities that we mentioned with Vash the Stampede as a protagonist that he has made with other protagonists, do you think he stands apart from them in the way that he does have a very pacifist ways? He doesn't resort to violence, all about peace and love, resolving things, not killing people. Do you think that's kind of a big thing that kind of sets him apart from other, action protagonists that we see in other, anime series? Is his different resolutions to conflict?
I definitely think so. I think it's a breath of fresh air, honestly, to get something with a character like that again. It's what I've been missing from Superman for the last 12 years. That I wish they would do with that character. I think it's I don't feel like you see it enough at all. And so yeah, to me it stands out like entirely, because I like a lot of dark stories, but there is something repetitive about the morally gray, you know, I'll kill when I have to, or I'm going to kill before they come at me kind of characters. I feel like we see almost entirely that, at least nowadays in the manga. And even when this was coming out, I mean, Spike, if you're going to compare to other characters from anime at the 90s, like Spike he didn't really have any issue with that. Guts has no issue with that in Berserk. I think most of the time that's not what we get. And yeah, I think it's really, really nice to see.
Yeah. I'd concur on that. I like Outlaw Star was another space western that was released in 1998, and that, along with Cowboy Bebop, they were okay with killing. Like if you had to kill, like you're not going to go wantonly killing, but you'll kill if you have to. And I feel like the constant allure of that option that Vash consistently rebuffs, and the overall thing being Knives' constant lure to, come on, give into the dark side, Luke, come on. Just, I thought that was kind of pleasant.
Nice. Now that this series, Stampede is in 2023, it's such a different landscape anime wise than what we've seen in 98, where we saw, we mentioned the westernized style of Trigun, and we saw a lot of influence of the Western culture on anime back in the day. Now you're starting to see the reverse of that, where anime is influencing a lot of stuff now in Western culture, because you had a lot of people